Dear listeners, a new day and a new story to discuss. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that interests me. Listen and write down what you think about this situation. I'm interested in your opinions. The day kicked off without any forewarning of the emotional tsunami it was about to unleash. My alarm clock, a persistent nemesis, blared at 5 a.m. sharp, ripping me from the sweet clutches of sleep. I stirred, my body heavy with reluctance, ready to start another day in the endless cycle of wake, work, sleep, repeat. Jenna, my partner in life and love for the past 25 years, lay beside me, a picture of peace in the early morning light. As I made a move to escape the bed's warmth, her hand found mine, pulling me back with a gentleness that spoke volumes of the years we had shared. Her touch, electric, sent familiar shivers down my spine, rekindling memories of our youth when everything was intense and our love was new. 5 more minutes, Jenna whispered, her voice laced with a sleepiness that tugged at my heartstrings. It was a dance we had performed countless mornings, a plea for just a moment more in our sanctuary before the world demanded our attention. I wish we could, I replied, my voice tinged with the regret of a man bound by the obligations of the day. The moment, however, was fleeting. Jenna, ever the force of nature, sprang to life with a vitality that belied her years. She kissed me, a peck that promised more, before slipping from under the covers to start the coffee machine, the heart of our home where every good day began. The shower did little to wash away the nagging feeling of routine. As the water cascaded over me, I pondered the monotony of our lives, how each day blurred into the next with little to distinguish one from another. Dressing in the usual business casual, I made my way to the kitchen, where Jenna had already laid out the foundations of our breakfast. The air was filled with the rich aroma of coffee and the sizzle of eggs on the stove. Jenna moved around the kitchen with an ease born of repetition, her dance between the counter and the stove a ballet I had come to know by heart. I took my place at the island, watching her, the silent observer to the quiet efficiency of our morning routine. Plans for today? Jenna asked, breaking the silence between us as she plated the eggs and handed me a cup of coffee, black, just the way I liked it. Same old, same old. You. I responded, taking a sip of the coffee, letting its warmth spread through me, a temporary shield against the day ahead. Jenna leaned against the counter, her eyes scanning the day schedule on her phone. I thought we might try something different for dinner. Meatloaf, baked potatoes. How does that sound? Perfect, I said, the mundanity of our conversation a stark contrast to the chaos that was about to unfold. I'll pick up some fresh bread on the way home. Maybe even a pie. A pie? You're going to spoil me, she teased, her smile reaching her eyes, lighting up her face in a way that reminded me why I had fallen in love with her all those years ago. There's no one else I'd rather spoil, I shot back, the words heavy with truth and a lifetime of shared moments. We shared a kiss, a brief collision of lips that held the weight of a quarter century together, before gathering our things and heading to the garage. Another kiss, a promise of return, and then we were off, Jenna to her world and me to mine, not knowing that the day would end with our lives irrevocably changed. The tranquility of the morning commute offered no hint of the upheaval that was about to ensue. Traffic flowed smoothly, a rare occurrence that I savored, letting the rhythm of the road and the hum of the engine lull me into a false sense of security. My mind wandered to dinner plans and the comfort of routine, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. My arrival at work was met with the usual banter and the clatter of keyboards, the office buzzing with the energy of a typical day. I settled into my cubicle, diving into the day's tasks with the focus of a man well-versed in his responsibilities. The morning passed in a blur of emails, meetings, and deadlines until a sudden call from my boss, Harry, shattered the monotony. Could you step into my office for a moment? Harry's voice crackled through the phone, his tone urgent, leaving no room for debate. Of course, be right there, I replied, curiosity piqued. Harry was not a man given to dramatics, which meant the situation was serious. The walk to Harry's office felt longer than usual, each step heavy with anticipation. As I entered, the look on his face confirmed my worst fears. Something had gone terribly wrong. Shut the door, would you? Harry gestured, his expression grim. I complied, taking a seat across from him, bracing myself for the news. It's St. Louis, he began, his hands clasped tightly on the desk. There's been an incident. My heart sank. The St. Louis office was our problem child, frequently mired in drama and inefficiency. What happened? I asked, my voice steady despite the growing knot in my stomach. 2 of our team members, Baker and Smithers, have been involved in a serious altercation. It's messy. The words hit me like a physical blow. Baker and Smithers were key players in the St. Louis operation, their conflict spelling disaster for the already struggling branch. Baker caught Smithers with his wife, Harry continued, the words hanging in the air, heavy with implication. I was stunned into silence. The personal nature of the conflict, its potential to wreak havoc on our operations, was a scenario I had never anticipated. Baker's been arrested, and Smithers is in the hospital. With both of them out, the office is leaderless. I need you to fly out there, take charge. The request felt surreal, as if I had been thrust into a bad movie. When? I managed to ask, my mind racing to rearrange the suddenly upended plans of my day. Flight's at 2:20 p.m. You'll need to leave immediately. The urgency in Harry's voice brooked no argument. I nodded, the weight of the task settling on my shoulders. I'll need to inform Jenna, I said, already calculating the logistics of the unexpected trip. Harry's nod was sympathetic. Do what you need to. Just make sure you're on that plane. The return to my cubicle was a blur of activity. Calls made in haste, a quick packing list drafted, the day's plans discarded like so much detritus in the wake of the crisis. Yet, when I attempted to reach Jenna, her secretary's words stopped me cold. She's in a meeting, can't be disturbed. The normalcy of the statement, so at odds with the chaos of my current reality, left me disoriented. I left a message, the words inadequate to convey the turmoil I felt. With no time to waste, I headed home to pack, the journey marked by a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. Arriving to find Jenna's car in the driveway, confusion gave way to suspicion, the seed of doubt planted by her secretary's evasion growing into a gnarled vine of apprehension. The house was too quiet, the silence a tangible presence as I stepped inside. A trail of clothing, a breadcrumb path of infidelity, led from the living room to the upstairs bedroom. My heart hammered in my chest as I followed, each step heavier than the last. At the threshold of our bedroom, the world tilted on its axis. The sight that greeted me, Jenna entwined with a stranger in the bed we had shared for 25 years, was a visceral blow, a betrayal that cut to the very core of my being. For a moment, time stood still, the only sounds the racing of my heart and the distant echo of their oblivious passion. The man, upon noticing my presence, froze, the color draining from his face. Jenna, too, caught in the act, her expression a mix of shock and desperation. I stood there, a spectator to my own life's unraveling, the words I had planned to say dissolving into the ether. The scene before me, a tableau of betrayal, spoke louder than any words could. I was just coming to get some things, I stammered, my voice hollow, the absurdity of the situation rendering me speechless. Jenna's attempts at explanation, her pleas for understanding, fell on deaf ears. The damage was done, the trust we had built over a lifetime shattered in an instant. Without another word, I turned, leaving the wreckage of my marriage behind, the sound of Jenna's desperate cries a bitter soundtrack to the end of all we had known. The world outside seemed surreal, a stark contrast to the turmoil that raged within me as I drove away from the house that was no longer a home. My mind was a tempest of emotion, swirling with betrayal, anger, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The drive was mechanical, my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road, but my thoughts were ensnared in the vivid imagery of Jenna's infidelity. Upon reaching the airport, the act of checking in and navigating through security felt like moving through a fog, each step taking me further away from the life I thought I knew. Settled at a cafe, waiting for my flight, I was a man adrift, the anchor of my marriage severed by Jenna's actions. The silence of my phone was a stark reminder of the distance now between us. I had attempted to reach Jenna, to confront her, to demand explanations, but her silence was a wall I couldn't breach. It was during this time of forced reflection that I decided to delve into the evidence of betrayal I had unwittingly collected, Stan North's wallet and checkbook, the tangible proofs of the stranger who had invaded my life. As I sifted through the contents of the wallet, a plan began to form, a way to confront not just Jenna but also the man who had become an unwitting participant in our drama. The emergency contact card, a lifeline to another world, became the first step in my quest for answers and, perhaps, a semblance of closure. Dialing the number, my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. The voice on the other end, All's North, was unsuspecting, a mirror to my own shock when faced with the truth of our spouse's betrayal. I'm afraid I have some unsettling news about your husband, Stan, I began, the words heavy on my tongue. The disbelief in All's voice was palpable, a denial of the possibility that her life, too, was about to be upended. The conversation that followed was a dance of revelation and realization as I laid bare the events that had unfolded, sparing no detail. Alls's request to see the items I had found, a plea for tangible proof, was a turning point. It was an acknowledgement of the shared pain and confusion that bound us, strangers linked by the actions of those we trusted most. The decision to meet, to exchange not just the stolen items but also the stories of our fractured marriages, was a step into the unknown. As I boarded my flight, leaving behind the city and the life I knew, I was propelled not just by duty but by a need for understanding, for connection in the midst of betrayal. The flight was a blur, time suspended between the life I had left behind and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Landing in St. Louis, the reality of my task at the office awaited, a distraction from the personal upheaval that loomed large. It was in St. Louis, amidst the chaos of professional obligations, that the opportunity to confront arose. The call from Alls, her voice now familiar, carried an invitation laced with trepidation and hope. The arrangement to meet, to share our stories and perhaps find solace in the shared experience of betrayal, was a beacon in the darkness. As I made my way to the agreed-upon location, the weight of the upcoming confrontation bore down on me. The meeting with Alls was not just about the exchange of Stan's belongings. It was about facing the reality of our situations, about seeking answers in the face of betrayal. The cafe where we met was neutral ground, a public space where our private dramas unfolded. Alls, with her fiery hair and a presence that commanded attention, was a figure of strength and vulnerability. The initial awkwardness, the struggle for the right words, gave way to a flood of emotions as we shared our stories, the pain of betrayal a common thread that bound us. The revelation of the depths of our spouse's deception was a cathartic experience, a purging of the anger and hurt that had festered within. As we spoke, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, the motivations and actions of Jenna and Stan becoming clearer, though no less painful. In the sharing of our pain, a bond was formed, an understanding that, though we were victims of our spouse's selfishness, we were not alone in our suffering. The meeting with Alls, though born of the worst circumstances, offered a glimmer of hope, a possibility of moving forward from the wreckage of our marriages. As I left the cafe, the weight of the confrontation lifted slightly, the act of sharing and listening a balm to the open wounds of betrayal. The journey back to the reality of my life, to dealing with the aftermath of Jenna's infidelity, was a path I now knew I wouldn't have to walk alone. In the wake of the storm, as the dust of betrayal settled, the house that once echoed with laughter and love now stood silent, a mausoleum of memories and broken promises. Jenna and I orbited each other like distant planets, our interactions cold and mechanical, devoid of the warmth that had once defined us. The days blurred, each one a mirror of the last, a Groundhog Day of awkward silences and unspoken recriminations. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I found myself sitting across from Jenna at the dining table. The space between us was filled with the detritus of our shattered relationship. Unopened mail, a pair of salt and pepper shakers, a silent testament to the chasm that had opened up between us. "I think we need to talk about how we're going to manage this situation," I ventured, breaking the silence that had become our constant companion. Jenna looked up, her eyes weary, the lines on her face etching deeper with each passing day. "Yes, we do," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking," I continued, marshaling my thoughts. "We can't go on like this, living as strangers under the same roof. We need some ground rules, a new arrangement." Jenna nodded, a flicker of interest in her eyes. "What do you have in mind?" "For starters, we split the household expenses down the middle. We maintain a joint account for that purpose, but otherwise, our finances should be separate." "And the house?" Jenna asked, her voice steadier now. "We share it, but we live independently. You keep the master bedroom. I'll move into the guest room." The words felt foreign on my tongue, a formal delineation of space in the home we had once shared so intimately. Jenna's reaction was a mix of relief and sadness, a mirror of my own conflicted emotions. "What about us?" she ventured, the question hanging in the air, fraught with the weight of our shared history. "There's no us, not anymore," I replied, my voice firm but not unkind. "We're roommates, Jenna, nothing more." The finality of my words seemed to settle over us like a shroud. Jenna nodded, accepting the new terms of our coexistence with a resigned dignity. "We'll need to figure out a schedule for the kitchen, the laundry, shared spaces," she said, practicality overtaking emotion. "Yes, we'll work out the details," I agreed, grateful for the semblance of normalcy the mundane logistics offered. As we continued to discuss the intricacies of our new arrangement, a plan began to take shape, a blueprint for navigating the wreckage of our marriage. It was a strange negotiation, a treaty of sorts, delineating the boundaries of our new reality. In the days that followed, I moved my belongings into the guest room, transforming it into a space that was solely mine. The physical act of relocating my life to another part of the house felt symbolic, a tangible acknowledgement of the distance that had grown between Jenna and me. Our interactions became transactional, limited to discussions about bills or whose turn it was to buy groceries. We moved through the house with a careful choreography, avoiding each other's spaces, our lives parallel but never intersecting. And yet, despite the awkwardness, a semblance of peace settled over the house. The constant tension that had pervaded every corner dissipated, replaced by a resigned acceptance of our new normal. It was a hollow victory, the peace of the defeated, but it was peace nonetheless. As I lay in bed each night, listening to the silence of the house, I couldn't help but wonder how we had come to this, two strangers living together, bound by nothing more than shared expenses and a mutual desire to avoid further conflict. It was a far cry from the life we had envisioned all those years ago, a bitter reminder of how far we had fallen. But in the absence of the love that had once bound us, this new arrangement was all we had, a fragile truce in the aftermath of betrayal. The days following our uneasy truce were laden with a tension that was as palpable as the summer humidity. Our interactions were limited, each of us circling the other warily, like combatants sizing up their opponent before the next skirmish. The house, once a sanctuary of love and warmth, had become a battleground where the specter of Jenna's betrayal loomed large, casting long shadows over our every encounter. It was during one of these aimless evenings, as I sat in the makeshift solitude of my new quarters, that the seeds of retaliation began to germinate in the fertile ground of my wounded pride. The thought of Jenna's infidelity gnawed at me, a relentless ache that demanded satisfaction. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the audacity of it, the sheer disregard for the life we had built together. I can't just let this go, I muttered to myself, the walls of the room echoing back my resolve. The idea, once born, took root quickly, growing in intensity until it became a plan for retribution, a way to reclaim some semblance of dignity from the ashes of my despair. The opportunity presented itself unexpectedly, a chance encounter that would serve as the perfect vehicle for my revenge. Jenna had left her email open on the shared computer, a carelessness born out of our newfound estrangement. Among the mundane correspondence, a message caught my eye, a confirmation for a weekend getaway, a romantic escape for her and the man who had usurped my place in her life. A cold fire lit within me as I read the details, the pieces of my plan falling into place with a clarity that was almost divine in its inspiration. "Two can play at this game," I whispered, the dark resolve settling over me. The following days were a blur of preparation, each step meticulously planned and executed with a single-minded focus. I reached out to old friends, those who had drifted away in the wake of Jenna's betrayal, rallying a cadre of allies for my cause. Together, we plotted a counteroffensive, a party to end all parties, to be held on the very weekend of Jenna's clandestine retreat. The invitations went out, word spreading like wildfire through our social circles. The guest list read like a who's who of our shared history, a deliberate provocation that I knew would reach Jenna's ears even in her absence. And then, the day arrived. The house, once a mausoleum of my broken heart, came alive with the sound of music and laughter, the air thick with the scent of grilled food and the heady promise of retribution. As the guests arrived, each one a testament to the life I had once shared with Jenna, I felt a surge of exhilaration, a rush of power that was intoxicating in its intensity. The party was in full swing, the backyard transformed into a tableau of revelry and defiance, when my phone buzzed with a message from Jenna. Her words, a mix of disbelief and anger, were a balm to my wounded soul. "Hope you're happy," she wrote, the digital missive a poor substitute for the confrontation she was clearly itching for. "I'm ecstatic," I replied, my fingers dancing over the keys with a glee that bordered on the maniacal. "Just thought I'd throw a little party while you were off gallivanting with your lover. Consider it my final farewell to the life we once shared." The message sent, I turned back to the festivities, a hollow victory in the grand scheme of things, but a victory nonetheless. As the night wore on, the laughter and music fading into the early hours of the morning, I was left with the bitter taste of ashes in my mouth. Retaliation, I realized, was a double-edged sword, one that cut the wielder just as deeply as its intended target. As I surveyed the aftermath of the party, the detritus of my revenge littering the once pristine yard, I understood the futility of my actions. Jenna's betrayal had irrevocably altered the course of our lives, and no amount of retribution could undo the damage that had been done. In the silence that followed, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I was left to ponder the cost of my vengeance, the price paid in the currency of my own soul. And as I stood alone amidst the ruins of my Pyrrhic victory, I realized that the path to healing would require more than just the satisfaction of retaliation. It would demand forgiveness, both of myself and of the woman who had once been my everything. But that, I knew, was a journey for another day. For now, I was content to let the silence speak, a testament to the scars we bear and the strength it takes to move beyond them. Crafting a chapter that encapsulates resolutions and reflections while imbuing it with the desired level of excitement and detail, and adhering to the narrative voice you specified, presents a unique challenge. This phase of the story, typically reserved for introspection and the winding down of tensions, will be approached with a focus on emotional depth, the resolution of internal conflicts, and a careful examination of the protagonist's journey to finding peace or acceptance. Here's how the chapter might unfold. In the aftermath of the party, the house seemed to echo with a silence that was both oppressive and cleansing. The debris had been cleared, the last vestiges of my attempt at retribution swept away, leaving behind a stark reminder of the tumultuous journey Jenna and I had endured. It was in this quietude that I found myself reflecting on the path that had led us here, to this moment of uneasy peace. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room that had become my sanctuary. I sat at the desk, a cup of coffee in hand, its warmth little comfort against the chill of introspection. The events of the past weeks had taken their toll, leaving me exhausted in body and spirit. Yet, it was in this weariness that clarity began to emerge, like the first rays of dawn piercing through the night. I realized that the anger and bitterness I had harbored were no longer the flames they once were, but had instead simmered down to embers. The desire for revenge, once a roaring fire, had left in its wake a landscape that was ripe for renewal. It was a revelation that came not with fanfare but with a quiet acceptance, a surrender to the inevitable ebb and flow of life. Jenna and I had become strangers, our lives diverging on paths that were unlikely to ever intersect again in any meaningful way. The love that had once bound us together had been irrevocably altered, transformed by betrayal and heartache into something unrecognizable. Yet, it was in acknowledging this transformation that I found a semblance of peace. As the day wore on, I ventured outside, the fresh air a balm to my weary soul. The garden, once a labor of love for Jenna and me, had fallen into neglect, a metaphor for our relationship. I began to tend to it, pulling weeds and pruning the overgrown plants, each stroke of the shovel a step towards forgiveness. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a gift to be bestowed upon Jenna but a gift to myself. It was the key to unshackling myself from the past, to moving forward with my life free from the chains of resentment. It was a daunting task, one that I knew would not be accomplished in a day. Yet, it was a journey I was now willing to undertake. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, I paused to reflect on the lessons learned from this ordeal. Love, I had discovered, was not a fortress impervious to harm, but a fragile thing that required care and nurturing. Trust, once broken, was not easily mended, but neither was it beyond repair. The sound of the front door closing snapped me out of my reverie. Jenna had returned, her presence a reminder of the reality we now faced. We exchanged a look, a wordless communication that spoke volumes. There was an understanding between us, a recognition of the pain we had both endured and the separate paths we would now walk. In that moment, I realized that our story did not require a dramatic conclusion, a neat resolution to tie up the loose ends. Life, in all its messy complexity, often left questions unanswered, paths untraveled. It was enough to know that we had both survived, that we had emerged from the crucible of our shared pain with a newfound resilience. As Jenna retreated to her part of the house, I turned back to the garden, the fading light casting long shadows across the newly turned soil. The work was far from over, both in the garden and within myself. Yet, I faced it with a sense of hope, a belief in the possibility of new beginnings. In the end, it was not about finding a way back to what had been, but about forging a path to what could be. And as the stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, I understood that this was not an ending but a beginning, a first step on the long road to healing and redemption.